All right, I said I was gonna do it, so I'm gonna do it. This is my book, P3, Parks, Pipes, and Powder. I think it came out in like 2000, when did this come out? 2005? I don't know when this came out. I think it came out in, it says 2003. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. 2003. Anyways, so P3, a lot of people ask me what's up with the P3 because there's that shop that's in Mammoth that kind of has the same, it has the exact same name. Fully coincidental. And I don't know if, it was just, I think I put my book out right around the same time that shop even opened up. So just in the ether, just got pulled out. I don't know. At any rate, it's a good shop in Mammoth, and I highly recommend you go there. So anyway, so I'm just gonna do chapters and see how this goes and give you like the inside scoop on what was happening. And yeah, and I guess we'll just go from there. I know everyone's kind of on house arrest right now. Some people have it worse than others. I mean, we're here in San Diego, and you can, we're not to go out and to go to restaurants or go to bars or any of that stuff, or even congregate in big groups. But we're lucky we can still go and surf, or we can go skate. You just can't, you just don't want to do it in groups and be in coughing distance. And San Francisco's got it kind of gnarly. I think we're all going to end up having it kind of gnarly here. So I'm going to try to help you make the best of it. So we're in here in my garage, and luckily there's not people running around. There usually is. So I'm just going to read you guys the chapters from this. So first off, big shout out to this guy, Eric Blem. Basically, the way that we did this book is I had just broken my arm in 2002, I guess. Yeah, it was like right before 2003. It was a day at Park City in Utah. It was like a Rosignol thing. We had just done the week before, I think it was the Vans Triple Crown, used to be a series, Vans Triple Crown series of snowboarding. And we were in Park City for some Rosignol event. I was riding for Rosignol at the time. And I went off a jump in super flat light, and the speeds were kind of weird that day. I was riding with J2 and Hannah Beeman and maybe Scotty Arnold, and it was just like a fun crew. And I don't know, the speed was weird, and I remember casing the jump super hard, and then breaking my arm super bad. Basically my humerus, where it connects into the elbow joint, and that's on the back cover of this. That is my current. That's my current scene in my elbow and my humerus bone, and I never got any of that stuff taken out. It's in there. The doctor told me that if I wanted to go get it taken out, it would be just invasive of a surgery, if not more so, to get it out than to, have it put in. So it's still in there. It's a little bonus. So anyway, so after I did that, it was a great time for me to sit around and talk story with Eric Blem, and he basically wrote everything down. He's basically crafted this, he weaved all the words together, and he would give me portions of the manuscript, and I would go through and I would change words and change sentence structure to make it sound more like, it was me in a conversation, talking in a conversation. So there's still some parts of the book that it's a little cringy. I mean, it's just like reading your own thing is kind of cringy as it is anyways. So, I haven't really read through this, and probably since it came out. So this should be fun. And we're just gonna get into it. I'm just gonna read a chapter a day, I guess, and then hopefully you guys like it. I'm gonna post it on Instagram. So straight up, the cover, behind the scene on this one, Rich Van Every shot this photo. It was right after the first Grand Prix to qualify for the 2002 Olympics. This may be the day after or the day before or something like that. It's just an alley-oop backside air. I think that shot actually was on a DC boot catalog as well. I like that shot. I like that trick. I like that board. And then you just kind of going through here as we open up the book. This is the very first X Games that went down at Snow Summit. That's Fabian Rohrer. He got third. That's me. I'm very happy that day. And then Daniel Frank right there. That was a That was an insane day. I'll tell you that. That was pretty nutty, but we'll get into that. I'm sure, I think it's in there somewhere. And then the year that this came out was 2003. And it was a particularly gnarly year for people in our sport. I mean, we lost Craig Kelly. We lost a really close friend of mine, Jeff Anderson, and Rossignol teammate, Tristan Picot. And it was a gnarly year. I remember, especially I was, kind of just laid up with my arm when Craig Kelly died. And, I will never forget that day. And then I was actually in Japan with Jeff Anderson. We were all at this contest, staying at these hotels that we'd run around, and I was kind of snowboarding again by that point. My arm was in like this big weird sling, and I was like had some crazy contraption to like open my hand because the nerves were kind of severed, so I could close my hand, but I couldn't open my hand. So anyway, that's a whole other story. But that was we were in Japan, and that's when Jeffy passed away. And then, of course, I didn't know what the circumstances were with Tristan, but, he was close because he was a Rossignol team rider. He was an amateur kid coming up, and it was just a gnarly year. So I dedicated my book to those guys. And then we go into the contents page, and there's, that's the backside 900, the McTwist 900 thing that, wet cat that Billy Anderson named at the 1998 US Open. I think that was like 2 weeks later after that comp at Stratton. And I kind of figured out how to actually do them there. I only had done a couple at Stratton before that. And then, I kind of figured out how to do them at the West Beach Classic. West Beach Classic was such a good comp. I'm really bummed that comp is not around anymore because it was super fun. It kind of turned into the Tellus festival up there, and it kind of lost some of its jive, but West Beach Classic was amazing. Okay, so then we go into right here, the first, I think that's that's Breck's pipe. Yeah, it's Breckenridge's pipe. I think it's just like a backside grab, like a melon grab 540 or something like that. Rob Gracie shot that photo, and that was December of '97. So that was the year of the whole Olympic shebingle. So that kind of brings us to, I guess, the opener page. So here we go. This is me reading my book to you. Then we entered the Olympic Stadium in Nagano, Japan. Nothing could have prepared me for the moment. Nothing could have prepared. This is going to be great. Nothing could have prepared me for that moment. I was totally screwing around, not taking anything seriously. But when I walked into that arena, it just gripped me in so many ways. I was overwhelmed with American pride. I saw the flag at the front of the line of the American team, and the crowd was roaring like nothing I'd ever heard. Every nationality and every country I'd ever heard of was there. We felt like we were all one big team. The camaraderie got me right in the throat. Borders and politics melted away. North Korea and South Korea walked out together. I forgot about who was warring with whom. I forgot about all the bad in the world. Then the speeches began. First in Japanese, the host country, then in French, and then English. I hung on to every single word, even the ones I didn't understand. A hypnotic numbness set in. I realized I was on the inside of the Olympics, not on the outside looking in. Then, as it went on, I forgot about my nationality. I forgot about the competition, and that I was a favorite to win the halfpipe event for the first American Olympic snowboard team. I even forgot I was a snowboarder. For a few minutes, I was just a human being and being part of something so much bigger. So that was one of the most trippy experiences ever. And, I've got some friends that have been to the Olympics since, and now that snowboarding has been to the Olympics, is kind of like old hat. But at that point, the most formal thing that we had done was like X Games, and I was just a skater, and my whole attitude at that point was like, like who cares? And I kept blowing it off like it was just another contest and like whatever. But it was it was so gnarly walking in there, and like, you know, basically when we were queued up to walking out for opening ceremonies was nuts. I mean, there was like, you know, people had on these, I mean, not, we had the craziest costume ever on. Like we just looked like a bunch of cowboys. Like we just walked off the streets of Steamboat. But you know, there was all these other countries with these amazing outfits that were, you know, for the opening ceremony, and it was just, you know, everyone was. It was just an excitement that was crazy, and then, you know, you walk into this huge stadium, and it's just like thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and it's just, you know, there's so much. It was just so loud. Like when you walked in, I just remember like looking up, and, you know, all the teams walking together, and it was so loud. It was so loud. So, all right, here we go. On to chapter 1. That's me, right there. That's me in 1970. So, freshly squeezed. I have a really big head. You know, I don't particularly think that looks like me. It kind of looks more like my son Cam than it does me. But yeah, and I also look cross-eyed, which is pretty amazing. So here we go. Chapter 1, punk runt dropping into life. This is a little bit cringy. This is kind of cringy to me because, you know, I don't know, you'll figure it out. I was conceived when my parents, see that right there. That is cringy. Like talking about your conception this is very cringy. I wish I could just skip to chapter 2 and where it gets a little more exciting. I was conceived when my parents, Ken and Patricia Richards, got busy on a weekend ski trip to Wildcat Mountain in New Hampshire during the spring of 1969. Gross. I don't want to picture my parents getting busy. I entered the world 9 months later on December 28th, 1969, and I've been shafted for Christmas ever since then. So since December 28th, 1969, I've been getting the shaft for Christmas. That was the exact due date the doctor had calculated. According to my mom, that was the last predictable thing I ever did. My parents were living in the tiny house in Worcester, Massachusetts that my mom bought when she was 17. 17! Mom buying houses at 17. My son is 18, and I don't know what would happen if we weren't here. I think the house would burn down. She was a modern woman and way ahead of her time for the 60s, mainly because of her mother, an entrepreneur who owned a hair salon where my mom started working when she was still in high school. By the time she graduated, she was pulling long hours and doing all the crazy beehive hairdos, and that's how she qualified for the mortgage. My mom met my dad, a leather goods salesman, on a blind date, and they got married in 1966 when she was 19 and he was 23. Things were a little different back then. They moved into her house, and 2 years after the marriage, they took that trip to Wildcat Mountain. Spring was in the air, and they named me Brant Todd Richards. Brant, after my mom's maiden name. No, Brant it's not my mom's maiden name. My mom's maiden name is Farley. Brant was my grandmother's maiden name. So there's a small mistake in here. And the only person to ever call me by that name was my 3rd grade teacher, Miss LaPearl. She was 1. The other person that calls me that name is the IRS. So it's my 3rd grade teacher, Miss LaPearl. She drove a jet black Volkswagen Bug. She was basically the equivalent of the Wicked Witch of the West from Wizard of Oz. And then the IRS is just the IRS. So, moving right along. Here's a picture of my parents getting married. There they are in the car. And then there's a picture of me. That's a sweet mask. My uncle took that photo. And there's me pretty hyped. I don't know what I'm getting. What am I getting for Christmas right there? I don't know. But Christmas was sweet. I used to get lots of good toys. Both driven professionals, my parents found out quickly enough that juggling work and family life was a full-time job, plus overtime. In order to give me the attention they thought I deserved, they decided I wouldn't be having any brothers and sisters. I'm an only child. Fun fact. That's why I am the way I am. Ask Brian Fox. Way ahead of her time once again. My mom volunteered to get that taken care of. What the hell? Who puts this in a book? Seriously. My mom volunteered to get that taken care of, quote unquote, which was absolutely fine by my father, who didn't like the idea of anyone messing around his family jewels with a sharp scalpel. Oh my God, my mom actually said this to Eric Blem. That is just wrong. As an only child, I had to be creative in order to entertain myself. My imagination was out of control. It wasn't enough to play with plastic dinosaurs. I had to go out in the woods and become a T-Rex. I was obsessed with dinosaurs. And then I discovered Godzilla and G.I. Joe, both of which became obsessions of mine. Halloween was my favorite holiday, still my favorite holiday, because I could dress up and be as scary as possible and rampage through the neighborhood behind the guise of something I definitely wasn't. Early on, that was monsters, then it was ninjas, and then eventually took on the cat burglar look. Hold on, there's a helicopter flying very close to my house. Okay. I may continue. Where was I? Early on, that was monsters, then ninjas, and then the cat burglar look. In reality, I was a runt, and I was young for my grade. I started kindergarten when I was 4, and I was a wee bit immature in social situations, still to this day. In 1974, we moved from the city, quote unquote city of Worcester, to a suburban town called Paxton. So if you're just catching up with current events, I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, and then grew up until I was 18 in a town called Paxton, Massachusetts, which is right near Wachusett Mountain. If you are a Massachusetts local or familiar with New England. Our new place was a New England-style farmhouse built in the 20s, and my parents converted the entire back of the house into a beauty salon named Hair Unlimited. So my mom, once again, was a hairdresser, and I had now moved into a new house that was now half beauty salon, half house. It was a thriving business with 3 or 4 hairdressers, and women would drive for hours for appointments with my mom and her staff. She was the shit as far as hairdressers went. The only downside to the business was that our house constantly smelled like perm solution, chemicals, and hair products. And cigarette smoke, I'll tell you that, because this was the 70s and smoking was a food group. My aunt or my grandparents used to watch me after school when I was really little. Once Hair Unlimited got rolling, and I'd been in grammar school for a while, my mom felt confident enough to leave me on my own until she closed up the shop or my dad came home from work. I'd get off the bus and wave at her while she put curlers in some lady's hair. Then I'd make a high-energy, sugar-based after-school snack and wreak havoc on my room, the house, or the nearby woods. I was just a step above a latchkey kid. 100% true. I was kind of like left to my own devices for my entire schooling. Around 1975, Hollywood was cooking up 2 things that would have a major impact on my life. Some guy named George Lucas started writing a science fiction story called Star Wars, which will eventually lead to one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, true story, and Peter Benchley teamed up with Steven Spielberg to bring Jaws to the big screen. I begged my parents to let me see Jaws because it was about a giant monstrous shark, and at this point I'm super into sharks. But they refused, pulling the usual, "You're too young. You're too young. You're too young." Whatever, I thought. I was 6 years old. By the time I was 8, my parents had become familiar with my imagination, but weren't yet willing to accept that I wasn't like other kids. My mom thought it was cute that I liked Halloween better than Christmas, but she had no idea I was a closet monster movie fanatic. I'd sneak downstairs late at night to watch horror movies and then torment my parents by crawling into bed with them. After repeated occurrences of my chronic nightmare syndrome, they figured out that I loved to scare myself. So it was probably a good idea, considering how much they liked the beach, that they pulled rank on the whole Jaws thing. So just in addition to this story, I snuck downstairs and my parents were watching The Exorcist when this is like, I don't know, right around that same time. And I snuck downstairs and watched, peeked through because we used to have this slatted stairway and you can kind of see into the living room. And I peeked through, and as I'm peeking through, I knew there was some scary movie on because my dad had been talking to my uncle about it and they were over they were there for some reason. And I peeked through and it was exactly at the time where Linda Blair's head spins around and she vomits pea soup over. And that was the craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And yes, so there was some slight trauma there. And in fact, like if I still, when I see The Exorcist, the hair stands up on my arms, but I really love that movie. In the summer of 1978, we took one of our annual pilgrimages to Cape Cod with my cousins. I was short, an underweight 8-year-old who made up for a lack of physique by making believe I was Godzilla stomping through the shore break like a 500-foot tall radioactive lizard. Sometimes I'd turn into the $6 Million Run, running through the shallow water, bending seaweed as if it was steel and hucking the cooler all over the beach, all in super slow motion, with lots of sound effects. $6 Million Man, great show, by the way. Lee Majors, that's another story for the out cold portion of this book. In deep water, I got a little edgy. I still hadn't seen Jaws, but I could sense the quiet before an attack. I knew it was coming, and it always did. The big kids, mainly my cousin Karen, she was bigger than I was, and she would try to drown me a lot. I was the most convenient thing available. My size was conducive to the feared head dunking accompanied by an inhalation of salt water. I'd come up coughing and barfing just in time for the biggest wave of the day to knock me off my feet and roll me along the bottom, pounding my micro body towards shore until I could crawl out onto the sand. Yes. In the late 70s, there weren't a half dozen Blockbuster video stores in every town. Both Beta and VHS home movie machines were super cutting edge, and if you had one, you were living large. It took a couple years for movies to make it from the big screen to the living rooms, and when they did, they were usually on TV. When I heard one of my parents' friends owned Jaws on Beta, I made immediate plans to visit that weekend. My love of horror overruled my paranoia of water. Actually, I didn't really put the two together, shark and water. I never was very good at math. I was 9 years old and had grown up on a steady diet of imaginary things with big teeth, but not realistic animals that actually exist. Fate almost saved me when my friend broke the news that we couldn't watch the movie because there were boobs in it. Full frontal nudity meant nothing to me, but the challenge of outsmarting his parents only strengthened my resolve to commando downstairs late that night and traumatize myself for life. I watched the entire thing, and by the time it was over, drowning seemed to be pretty mellow. Getting eaten by a submarine with teeth was my new horror. Go figure that I started surfing after a while, and we live in a very sharky spot, and Cape Cod is incredibly sharky, but yet I have no problem going out in the water there. So I conquered my fear, ladies and gentlemen. In 1977, my mom took me to see Star Wars, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. Even though Darth Vader scared the shit out of most kids, I thought he was just misunderstood. Laser blasts, lightsabers, and good battling evil in outer space captivated me. If a recruiter from the Rebel Alliance had knocked on my door, I would have signed up without hesitation. In fact, I dreamed of such a moment. Anything and everything Star Wars became an obsession. I organized make-believe battles in my bedroom, in my backyard, in the backseat of the car during road trips. Though dinosaurs, Godzilla, and army men still held a special place in my heart, I began to clear space in the shelves of my room for a Wookiee family of my own. Not far from our house in Princeton, Mass., there was a local mountain called Mount Wachusett, which is where my parents went to get in shape for the real ski trips they took to Vermont. That puny hill, it wasn't puny, I didn't say puny. It was a small hill, it's only like 1,500 feet vertical, but I wouldn't call that puny. That puny hill was the first place I slid on snow when I was 3 by standing in front of my dad on his skis. As I got older, my skiing got better, meaning faster. But I was still way more into eating French fries in the lodge. My version of skiing, or shushing, what the traditional East Coast skiers called skiing, consisted of going as fast as I possibly could without turning. The only reason I turned was to avoid hitting shushmogelman, which was what I would call skiers. I rarely went shushing alone. I almost always had a couple Star Wars action figures in my jacket pocket. That is horseshit. I never had that in my pocket. I don't know. I think that was just added for dramatic effect. Oh, we have pictures. I forgot to show you pictures. So this is me at the beach, moments before a near drowning experience, more likely than not. And this is me with the super sweet bowl cut. My mom's a hairdresser, and the best she could do was give me a cut based on Tupperware. Okay. He's outside my garage. Someone's making a lot of noise up there. I hope you guys can't hear them. I will try to talk louder so you don't hear them. The 3 years following the release of Star Wars dragged by painfully slow. Finally, in May 1980, The Empire Strikes Back hits theaters. I was 11 years old, and Boba Fett the Bounty Hunter was my hero. And Boba Fett at that point was a mail-away Star Wars figure that you could get by sending away proof of purchase seals from other Star Wars figures. And we didn't know what he was. They just had this figure that would show up in Saturday morning cartoons, and it would be like, you can mail away right now for this figure. And he was the coolest looking dude ever from Star Wars. And so everyone was pretty hyped on him, even though the dude only had like 4 lines in the whole movie. Anyways, Boba Fett, Bounty Hunter, hero. Watch The Mandalorian. It's a really good show. As I approached 8th grade, I began to wait, 8th grade? That wasn't in 1980. Was it? No, graduated 8th grade. Like, this must be a fast forward. As I approached 8th grade, I began to realize how cool it was to have the kind of freedom I had around my house. Most of my friends' moms stayed at home. We didn't have a sit down for dinner together family, and I liked it that way. It was not that we didn't love or appreciate one another. On the contrary, we were just comfortable with our lives. My dad sold his leather goods, and my mom made people beautiful, and I was being groomed for future accomplishments like Little League All-Star, All-State hockey goalie, football quarterback, and prom king. Yeah, right. I was the kid who got picked last for any team sport. I was a liability in football and made a better hockey puck than a player. My dad practically had to drag me on the fields to play Little League, and this is 100% true. I would sit down in the outfield and daydream. I hated it so much that my dad eventually gave up. By the time I hit 8th grade, Mount Wachusett had been more of a hangout than a place to go skiing. Since my dad couldn't really get me to play organized sports, he became a chaperone for the Paxton Middle School weekend ski trips. We'd take buses from the school parking lot, and I'd bring my skis, but I wouldn't really get any serious skiing in. I'd do the mandatory lift ride up with my dad, and then I'd ditch him and head straight to the lodge with my friends, Matt Swanson and Daryl Clark. We'd hang out, eat French fries, and look at girls who didn't like us. And that's a picture of me this is me in the garage of my house where I grew up in, and my dad would, I would wear his shin guards, and he would just like fire slap shots at me. It was really sketchy. And this is my friend all through grammar school, Daryl Clark, and I will read about him right now. Matt had been my friend since we were in grammar school. We clicked because he was into Star Wars monster movies and the British science fiction show Doctor Who. We always ended up out in the woods with our blowguns or throwing stars. We were aspiring ninjas. And the closest thing to a Jedi Knight I could possibly imagine. We even had black outfits and split-toe booties. I did have split-toe booties. I forget what those are called. What are those called? Tabby boots. I had tabby boots. I remember I got them at the Massachusetts State Fair, or the Big E, Eastern States Exposition Fair. Daryl was my primary Star Wars friend. We'd known each other since 6th grade, and we used to build elaborate bases for our Star Wars figures out of dirt, sticks, and tree bark. We constructed tunnels, bunkers, and booby traps for unsuspecting stormtroopers. So when Matt, Daryl, and I got together over fries and hot chocolate in the Wachusett Lodge, our conversations usually centered around Star Wars trivia. Skiing was more of a pitiful, geeky social calling than a sport at that point. One Sunday afternoon in January of 1983, I was over at my friend Matt Swanson's house in the morning when my mom called me unexpectedly. I thought she was going to ask me to come home early, and it was way worse. She said there was a really bad accident this morning, and she told me in a shaky voice, "Your friend Daryl was killed." My grandfather had died when I was in the 6th grade, but losing a friend when I was 12 years old seemed way worse. I'd been playing with Daryl only days before, and that made it even stranger and sadder. After my mom's call, I just wanted to go home, and that was where I learned the details. Daryl had been hit by a car while he was delivering newspapers. The death dealt a huge blow to the community, and being a small town, a lot of parents came together to support Daryl's folks. It was heavy, and I went to school the next day not knowing what to expect. When I got there, it was obvious that everyone knew. All these girls were crying, and it made me angry because they were the same girls who made fun of Daryl and I. They never gave him the time of day, and I felt like lashing out. What right do you have to cry? You didn't even know him. You didn't even want to know him. But instead, I kept my mouth shut, I didn't shed a tear, and I stewed about it. I was very analytical and tried to dissect why they were crying. I'd watch them doodle and wonder if they were crying just to fit in because it was the right thing to do. I eventually concluded yet that they were just trying to be cool. It never occurred to me that they might have been crying because they felt bad about that they had made fun of him. I was bitter and couldn't believe that they were as bummed as I was, or that their sorrow was genuine. I attended the wake, and what had been heavy got heavier. It was an open casket, and it was harsh. I don't think it's right to see someone like that, especially someone so young. But it was closure. It showed me what death was up close. It made me pull my emotions inward because all I did the entire wake was try to maintain myself. Open caskets are freaking gnarly, okay? Straight up. That is just not the way that I would like to have anyone remember me. After the funeral, I went home and kicked it with my toys. About a week later, my dad showed up in the middle of the day, right after I got out of school, and he broke down and told me how much he loved me. I hugged him, and he started crying. I was this puny little kid patting my dad on the back, telling him, "I love you too, Dad." I was a rock. The way I dealt with death was simple. I just didn't deal with it. Daryl's parents became friends with my parents, and years later, after I started snowboarding competitively, they followed my career. They even took up snowboarding themselves. And sometimes I wonder if this was because they knew Daryl would have gotten into snowboarding as well. He was so young when he died. This is really, really cool to know that these people have a connection with me that I think kind of keeps the spirit of their son alive. The rest of my 8th grade year was all about waiting for Return of the Jedi to premiere. And I remember the weekend it came out like it was yesterday too. Life was mostly back to normal when it finally hit theaters in May. All Star Wars enthusiasts were excited about the movie, but what separated the fans from the fanatics, i.e. the nerds, was the sheer magnitude of the occasion. In my opinion, opening day should have been declared a national holiday. Around the same time, I discovered the gore magazine Fangoria, which alternated with karate and ninja magazines as my favorite literature. My toy collection continued to expand with doubles of almost every action figure and most of the vehicles. I had 2 Millennium Falcons, 2 TIE Fighters, 2 X-Wings, you name it. I alternated between playing with G.I. Joe, which had just come onto the scene, and Star Wars, and concentrating on my ninja training. I took one karate class, and the master was like, "Sweep the leg, Johnny." Oh, the master was like, "Sweep the leg, Johnny" from Karate Kid. Psycho dojo from hell, and I was over it. Instead, I stalked imaginary bad guys in the woods, assassinated numerous trees with blow darts, and honed my lethal aim with an impressive collection of throwing stars. As summer approached, I made a new friend in my grade named Mark Finneran. He was a super smart kid from a super smart family, and he got me hooked on Dungeons and Dragons. His older brother and sister dressed differently, a la a flock of seagulls. He listened to The Clash, The Misfits, The Dead Kennedys, and Black Flag. I liked their year-round Halloween attire and drew everything I saw on album covers on my book covers and my notebooks. My mom wasn't too pleased when she noticed I'd drawn in black marker suicidal tendencies with a skull and upside-down cross, but she brushed it off as a phase. My dad tried to ignore it because it aggravated him too much, and we didn't really fight or anything, but we weren't on the same page. He certainly couldn't understand me, and I couldn't really understand myself. I was just a weird kid trying to figure out life. And that is me before I went punk rock phase. So the evolution of the bowl cut. Now we have the higher brow. If you've ever seen Star Trek, I look a lot like Spock, and a lot of people used to think I was Asian. It's strange to me because I don't really see it, but well, maybe, I don't know. Wachusett High was a big high school in the Worcester area. It was a conglomerate of 4 rural middle schools whose students merged together as a cluster of hormones with new friendships to forge and identities to establish. I was the kid who must have gotten on the wrong bus. I was 5'0". I think I was shorter than 5'0". I was probably like 4'8", and I looked like I was still in the 6th or 7th grade. I scurried from class to class, and at lunchtime I found my friends, Safety in Numbers, Matt and Mark. Like most of the other student population, had undergone a transformation over the summer. Deeper voices, taller and bigger. Everything that hadn't happened to me. Soon enough, I discovered that Wachusett High was divided into two distinctive groups. You were a jock and into Van Halen, or you were a hippie and listened to the Doors and the Grateful Dead. There were subcategories, of course, like the band or drama kids, and those subcategories had subcategories consisting of punkers or nerds. Below that, the lowest of the low, the no category kids, I was somewhere in between no category and nerd category, like a flyweight looking for a place to land. I'd had it pretty wired at my old school, and well, it's weird how you're in 8th grade and it's perfectly acceptable to play with toys, and then you have like one summer to wean yourself off all that shit, and then bam, you're a high school freshman. Nobody told me that playing with toys was unacceptable behavior for a high schooler, which I still think is bullshit. You should be a kid for as long as you can be a kid. Toys are fucking rad. Yeah. Where am I? One day, oh, this is good. This is the whole toddler. This is when I became named Toddler. One day in October of 1983, my freshman year, I'd gotten home from school, grabbed my toys, and gone into the woods behind my house to recreate the Battle of Endor. I had a bunch of Ewoks, Imperial Walkers, Stormtroopers, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Imperial speeder bikes, the whole entourage from Return of the Jedi. I was out there crawling around the dirt and leaves, and I'll tell you, I had a ton of extra stuff from Star Wars because this kid down the street from me, he stopped being into Star Wars and just gave me all of his stuff, and he had like everything. So I did end up having like doubles and triples of everything. It was pretty freaking sweet. I was stoked. Anyway, I was out there crawling around the dirt and leaves, doing my best to infiltrate the secret Imperial base. You know, blowing up Ewoks, knocking over walkers, hucking stormtroopers in the air, when I realized that 3 pretty girls from my grade were watching me from the trail that ran behind my house. They were laughing. For a brief moment, I thought they were stoked on my collection, or maybe laughing with me, not at me. No, I never thought that. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew that I had been caught red-handed with a bunch of Star Wars figures. But I got the picture real fast, and it got back to the entire school. It kind of actually worked kind of like this virus. Like, they told people on the bus, and then everyone on the bus told everyone else at school, and by 5th period, I had a new nickname. It was horrible. I was roused almost immediately. From the minute I jumped on the bus that next morning, I heard, "There's baby Todd. Did you bring your toys for show and tell? Toys are for toddlers," and crap like that. By the end of the day, it had mutated from baby Todd to baby toddler to just Toddler. The worst nickname in the world for a freshman. After school that day, the realization hit me that I wasn't a kid anymore and that I had to grow up. So I conveniently came down with a cold that night and faked it for 3 days so I wouldn't have to face anybody until it would blow over. When I got back to school, they were already on to their next victim. My rousing, which had been my 15 minutes of fame, was now over. How many more pages we got in this chapter? God, this is a lot of freaking information. Maybe I'll leave it right there for today. We're going to pick up tomorrow at Excalibur, only with wheels. And there's me, and that's Matt Finkel's ramp up the street from my house in Paxton. So I hope you enjoyed it. Clocked in at 38 minutes. So that's pretty good. I'll put a little placeholder there, and we will continue this tomorrow. I hope you've enjoyed story time in my garage. See you tomorrow.